With the antagonists that you face Evan off with, say with Van Sciver and the Nowhere Man, or Orlander Lazia in the Tower, how much time do you spend developing each of these key co-stars, so to speak, book in and out that Smoke and by extension readers will be spending so much time with on the page?
Well, you always want a very well-rounded, antagonist. I think early in my career, I started the tower when I was 19 years old, right? So I was a kid. And, you're at 19, you still don't have full myelination of your prefrontal cortex, like it's still black and white thinking. And so I think I wrote earlier in my career, I engaged much more with sort of villains and heroes. And as my career has evolved, I'm much more interested in protagonists and antagonists. I've always loved writing villains and giving them a point of view, but it's been interesting for me as I've tried to deepen out and embody my lead characters more. I've tried to do the same with my antagonists and have them have a real point of view and a real world or life philosophy that is convincing. It almost calls to us like a siren. If we were 15% more tweaked wrong, right, we might go that route. I want it to appeal to us. And I think it's like, I think younger writers, younger in their career writers, always want to make like the most evil possible villain. So then the good guy's really good when he goes up against them. But part of what I found is that when we have a protagonist struggling with complex, considered opponents who make them reconsider themselves and their worldview, in some ways, it almost accrues more positivity to the protagonist. You almost like them more for their missteps, for their getting hammered in their blind spots. Because guess what? That's us all the time if we're paying attention. Van Sciver is, yes, Van Sciver is, it is what it is, and that's all that it is his punchline. I mean, it's one of his slogans. He's a true believer. He's what Evan would have been had Evan been raised like most of the orphans. But Jack loved Evan too much, and he saw this streak of humanity. He saw something in this kid that he genuinely loved, though he'd never say those words or convey it in that fashion. And so he gave him this sense of humanity. He wanted him to keep his moral compass intact. And in a way, for an assassin, it's giving him also an Achilles heel, right? Because true believers are better off. And you can see this everywhere. If you have your cohort, if you have your community, if you lock down the grays and you only live in black and whites and you find your tribe, you're safe. You may not grow as much. You may not learn as much. You may not encounter as much, but you're safer. And so in a way, Jack giving and embodying Evan with this sense of humanity, I'm telling him, you never forget what it feels like to be powerless. He was the smallest kid in this foster home. I chose you because you know that in your spinal cord. Don't you ever forget that feeling. And that's part of why when Evan leaves the program, Orphan X, he gets disillusioned with the government application of his skills, these missions that are morally ambiguous. And when he leaves the program, he has this incredible skill set. He's got unlimited resources. He has all this money that's printed straight out of Treasury and, funneled through the Department of the Interior and stuffed in non-reporting, banks in the Caymans and in Switzerland and around the world, Virgin Islands. And he's got nothing to do except the skill set. And so what he decides is to take this unbelievable training that he's achieved as one of the top operators and assassins or salters in the world and apply it and offer it to people who are in desperate need, who can call that number that you mentioned, the anonymous number that's encrypted, and they have nowhere else to turn. And he can help people because that's the one thing that he feels like is still a fundamental good, no matter the things that he's done in his past.
When you arrived at that second book in the series, The Nowhere Man, please share a bit with viewers about your vision for this character's journey as it was continuing to play out in the sequel.
It's always important for me to have the physical peril to be mirrored psychologically or emotionally. That's the biggest point of interest in me. And so in a way, when he, with the Nowhere Man sees the evolution, it's sort of a 3-book arc where he and Van Sciver, who go back to that foster home together, right? It's sort of, he's like a Moriarty to his Sherlock Holmes, right? And so that relationship is very much like it's another version of Evan, where, Van Sciver says to him at one point, your biggest weakness is your soft heart. And for those of us who are living with Evan, it feels like he's anything but, right? Because he's still He's so removed, he's so protected, he's so defended, he's so solitary. But in relation to a true believer, and so I always want to put antagonists up against him who kind of hammer at or chisel at vulnerabilities that Evan has, where he's forced, in order for him to emerge triumphant, he has to be pushed to a new level of psychological growth, is almost one of the necessities of the event. It's not just about killing all the guys and returning home where I'm running the same script over and over again. They're prying into some different part of himself. And that's mirrored a lot in the classical, hero mythology. You got to go through, there's a reason why the Divine Comedy starts in the Inferno, right? Then it's Purgatorio, then it's Paradiso. You got to go through hell. There's no getting out of going through hell. And so I want him to go through hell, and a hell tends to be a personal one at times that, when we struggle, feels almost designed uniquely to torment us specifically, right? That's what happens when you're really suffering. You feel like you're living through something that is by design, right, there to hit you in all your worst, most vulnerable places. And are you going to break, or are you going to come all the way through and experience that misery and then emerge, right? And I always, I think of that I studied a lot of Carl Jung. That was, one of my biggest academic influences. And, when the hero goes forth and slays the dragon guards a pot of gold, which makes no sense because, why the hell does a dragon need a pot of gold? But that's always, to me, it's the self-awareness that you gain if you willingly go on the journey and face the thing that could devour you, right? And then you bring that back to society. How do you bring that back? What do you do with it then? And so I think that's at the base of my, lizard brain, archetypal narrative generating, factory or machinery that's hooked onto my spinal cord.
Writing over an arc of 3 books, when you arrived at Hellbent, where did you want Evan Smoke and other key co-stars to be in their character journeys by then?
I considered it to be an ongoing, for sure. I actually thought Van Sciver would be there all the way through, like Moriarty. And there's a character I introduced in the 3rd book named Josephine Morales, who is Evan's. She's sort of become, almost like a sidekick. She's a 16-year-old washout from the orphan program, Hispanic hacker girl, brilliant hacker, incredibly irreverent, incredibly disrespectful. First, he wants nothing to do with her. But she owns a part of his heart in a way. And what happened is, when I was writing Hellbent, she was supposed to die at the end. That's how it was charted out. And when I was writing her and seeing the ways that she could foil Evan and she could bring out different aspects of his character, it was so amazing. I got to the end and I couldn't part with her. And I'm so glad that I didn't, because she's such a key part and she's such a key reflection of Evan. And, she always is pushing him in ways that are uncomfortable, but in a lot of ways, that's his purest relationship, I think.
Arriving at books like The President and Out of the Dark, both of these have great plots. How do those tend to hit you? Do you play with different options or pretty much know what you want going in?
Well, I always knew at some point that when Evan chased down those around the orphan program, right, which was buried deep in the DOD, unsanctioned, right, not reporting to anybody, cut out men, a lot of young boys, and some girls killed, right, raised up to be killed, that would go up to the highest levels of power. And one of my favorite thrillers was The Day of the Jackal. And I always knew that I'd want to write something that was an homage to that, if only in the broadest thematics. And I thought, how cool would it be if, instead of like in Day of the Jackal, that the story is that instead of it being de Gaulle, it's the US president, and we're rooting for the assassin to succeed. Like, how can I get there? That seemed like an almost impossible task to arrive at. And so I sort of knew I was forging my way there. The other thing that happened with that, I didn't have the plot, I didn't have everything. I did a ton of research into Secret Service, security protocols, every which way, from the electronic noses at the White House to the schematics of the presidential limousine to the, counter assault teams deployed by Secret Service. I mean, it was everything. And so at first I looked at all of it, and, a lot of times I like to write myself into a complete disastrous mess, right? And then you have to figure out how to get your way out of it. And so when I looked at it, it was like looking at this towering edifice of security measures of the Secret Service. I laid them all out. And then I thought, how am I going to scale that? And I just didn't think I could get there. But in the process of it, if I engage in good faith with the ideas and lay it out and keep thinking, keep moving, it's like every time I think I'm dead in the water, something will show up when I need it. And it did with that. When I was figuring out, well, what's Evan's way in to attempt to do this? And, it wound up being that I figured out a few pieces to at least hatch a plan for him in a couple stages.